Would you say like fear still today drives you?
I always say to people, pressure makes diamonds. And I do feel like with me, that pressure comes from my own kind of fears that I put on myself. I know that this career can end at any moment. This money's great when we get paid, but if you don't fight, you don't get paid.
Would you say you have to be slightly wired different to be an MMA fighter, someone that really likes to have a fight? Or no, there's actually a lot more skill involved and you have to be more skillful than the mindset of a fighter?
You just have to be very intelligent because it is literally a human game of chess. When the people that you see play chess are usually very clever, very switched on. It's exactly the same.
The UFC, a multi-billion-dollar brand. My next podcast guest is a fighter, is an athlete, and someone that is determined to become a UFC world champion in the next 2 years. Nathaniel Wood, welcome on board the podcast, and everybody, please enjoy this episode. Before we start this week's podcast, I have to give a special mention to our sponsors. iSecure Vehicles. They are a brilliant company, a family-run business, and they specialise in vehicle safety and security throughout the UK. I know this company very well, and I also know the people behind the brand. If you've been following me on my podcast journey and on social media, you will know that I love cars and so does my network. This is why I'm very, very excited to be working with iSecure Vehicles, and this is why we have chosen them to be our sponsors for the Stephen Sullys Study podcast. Their team are professionals, experts, and they're efficient. Once their product is installed on your car, your vehicles, you will have the peace of mind that your asset is protected. Trust me, do not wait until it's too late. Get protection now. For more information about their products, including dash cameras, undetected immobilizers, and also car tracking systems, head over to isecure-vehicles.co.uk and remember to mention the Stephen Sullys Study podcast sent you. Right, welcome back to the podcast, Stephen Sullys Study. We're here at Woodbury House in Mayfair, and I think you're my first ever UFC guests on the podcast. So Nathaniel Wood, thank you very much for your time. Looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. And let's hope I am the first, because otherwise you might have upset someone if they have been on here previously. But it's good to be here, and thanks for having me.
Top man. What do you think about the gallery? I know you came to a Black the Rat show, which you reminded me of earlier. What do you think of the place, and what do you think of some of the artwork? Yeah,
it's lovely. I haven't ever really had any experience in the world of art, but some of the stuff that you was just showing me and the kind of stories behind it and stuff's pretty cool. So I'm definitely going to try and keep more of an eye on the art stuff now that I've come here. And the event that I came to, how did you say his name?
Black the Rat.
Black the Rat. Black the Rat?
Rat.
Rat.
Black the Rat.
Black the Rat. Some of his posters were cool. It was like a rat with a machine gun, and I tried to convince my missus, said, let's get some of these sort of things in our house. But she wasn't too keen on the idea. But I'm going to keep my eye open on some more artwork from now on. Good stuff.
So I was listening to another interview that you did on the way up to work today, and I found it really, really interesting. I'm gonna say this quote that you said on that particular interview. Between the age of 6 to 8, you said that you were afraid of going to hell. Mm-hmm. What was that? What does that actually mean?
So I suffer with OCD. I've been diagnosed with it only in the last couple of years, and anxiety, and I'm on tablets for that as well. And then in the interview, the lady asked about my OCD, and she said, what are your fears? And I remember when I was a child having fixed, proper fears of hell. Now, someone said to me on my Instagram, they said, it's just imagination. But what the difference is between OCD and just imagination is that I was obsessed with it. I could not get the thought of going to hell for doing something wrong out of my head when I was a kid. So I remember, I was probably the age 6, 7, 8, around that time. And I think I stole like a Haribo sweet from, the pick and mix things when I was a kid. And I was upset, and I wouldn't stop asking my mum, am I going to go to hell? Am I going to go to hell? And I don't even know how I got that obsession in my head. Maybe I saw a film or something, maybe I went to church and heard some story about hell, but I just remember being petrified, but thinking anything I did, I'd potentially go to hell. And the OCD, now I realise it was OCD when I was a child, was because having that compulsion to constantly ask my mum, am I going to go to hell? Am I going to go to hell? And I might ask about the same question 10 times a day. And it's kind of stayed with me ever since. So I have OCD now, it has never gone. But the fear of hell isn't necessarily there. But yeah, I remember when I probably went on for a bit longer than 8. I probably had it for about 4 years, where anything I did, I think I played, when you knock on someone's door and run off with my mates when I was probably 11, 12. And, I remember going home and then just thinking, no, I'm going to hell. And yeah, it's obviously, it's a strange thing to have and explain. When I was a kid, I just thought it was normal, or it was just a slight fear. But I know now, and I recognise that it was the OCD, is that I had to ask my mum. And even if in my head I was thinking, like, don't ask her. My brain was telling me, you've got to ask her. And then when she'd say to me, no, you're not going to hell for, knocking on someone's door or stealing a little Haribo sweet, I would still fixate about it. So, yeah, it's quite sad to think, because if I thought about my nephew or my niece now, who are a lot younger, if they had something like that, it would break my heart. But yeah, I guess it's still with me now, that OCD, and it's just something that I've got to learn to live with.
So just taking that small segment as a young boy, talking about hell, would you say like fear back then and even fear still today drives you as not just an athlete, but as an individual?
Yeah, so I think fear is there for a reason, and I think keeps us alive. The fear of hell isn't necessarily the best because it's not keeping me alive, but I guess what you could say is it's keeping me a good person, because if you're scared to go to hell, you won't do anything that would put you there, let's say. But for me now, like, yeah, when I'm training and let's say I've got a tough fight coming up, I'll have anxious thoughts about losing. I'll have anxious thoughts about my opponent being, far superior to me. And all that does is make me train even harder. Before I got to the UFC, I had big fears of, if I don't make this work, what am I going to do with my life? Because I'm qualified carpenter, but I couldn't hang a door to save my life. I definitely didn't want to be sitting in an office room. And for me, the fear of, if this doesn't work, is what am I going to do? I'm never going to be able to afford a mortgage in this country. And in a way, I'd deem myself a failure, if I can't make ends meet. Luckily, I got to the UFC, and I can only put that down with the pressure that I put on myself. I had to make it in this sport, and I'd like to think that I have made it. I've got a mortgage, I've got, nice car, I've got nice watches, and, I feel like I've made a success from the sport. And I feel like I've still got a long way to go. And I would put a lot of that down to the fear of losing, the fear of not making it work. And, I always say to people, pressure makes diamonds. And I do feel like with me, that pressure comes from my own kind of fears that I put on myself.
Okay. Being in sales, because in every single business, there's an element of selling, because if you don't sell your product, your brand, your service, or whatever, the business isn't going to survive. And typically the psychology is somebody or a business or an individual will purchase based upon two things. It's either the fear of losing out on something or the desire to gain. They always do typically say in books, in psychology or in sales books, that the biggest motivator usually is fear. Because if someone said, here's £10 million cash, or if you don't do this, you're going to lose your leg, someone's going to avoid losing a leg rather than go after the money most of the time. Yeah. But one thing I noticed just looking at your social profile, you've got UFC, I think, fighter or athlete. You had Cage Warrior World Champion, and then you've got UFC Future World Champion, which also tells me that the desire to gain is also a big factor in your mindset. So visualization, becoming a world champion, UFC world champion, is that something you practice day in, day out? And how do you go about thinking about your goals, visualizing the future?
Yeah, so it's a funny one. The last, I'd say, year and 6 months, I joined the David Lloyd's gym. And in the gym that we've got, it's a really nice spa. So in the spa, what I do is, I wouldn't say I go every day, I go every couple of days. but I do my visualization, my gratitude and my prayers at the spa because it gives me something to do, right? It gives me something to keep me occupied. So what I do is I turn up, I go into the steam room and the sauna, and in there what I do is I go through all the things I'm grateful for. Then what I do is I go in the plunge pool, which is the freezing cold thing, and then I go into the hot jacuzzi. And in the hot jacuzzi, I'll probably spend like 20 minutes and I will just do all of my visualizations of the things that I want to achieve or where I want to be, let's say. And so far, since I've been doing it, I've won every fight and the things that I've been visualizing have come true. Now, I'm not saying that's just because I visualized it, it's because I worked bloody hard for it. But now that I've kind of been doing that, I feel like it's almost like a part of my training regime. You know, I've got to do it. So not only have I got to do the visualization, I've got to do the gratitude, and I also do my little prayers to myself in my head. I don't do them aloud, you know, otherwise people might be giving me some funny looks. And yeah, as I say, since I've been doing the visualization, it's been helping, it's been working. And I try to now take it a step back. So let's say I want to be the UFC champion of the world. To get there, I've got to get past my next opponent. So I try not to visualize too much the end goal. I try and visualize the goal that I've got in front of me, because I've done it before where I've visualized past that opponent, and if anything, I've kind of underestimated him. So, you know, I'll have the last fight I had visualizing, you know, me coming out in the O2 arena where I've been before. So I try to remember, you know, everything that I saw in the O2 arena, the smell, you know, anything that I touched. I try and just go into that process. I think about winning, getting my hand raised, and obviously where I've fought in the O2 a few times, you know, it's very easy for me to visualize, you know, the crowd clapping, you know, standing on their feet, stuff like that. And yeah, that's what I do now. You know, I try and visualize the smaller things. I want to be a multi-millionaire. I'll try and visualize making the first 100,000, you know. And the thing that I've said to people as well is that whether you believe it or not, that it has anything to actually do with becoming true, it makes you feel good. So, you know, if you can sit there and picture all the things that you want to achieve and you imagine that you've already achieved them, you come away with a good feeling. And for someone that deals with anxiety and stuff, you know, if I do that, it keeps my mind occupied as opposed to going away with, you know, dark thoughts or, you know, worrying about dying or something like that. You know, it gives me something positive to look on. And yeah, as I say, it's enjoyable, you know, to visualize the things that you want to achieve.
Yeah. There's when I think of boxing, there's so many like former world champions, current world champions, people that have blown up and become uber successful, not just financially, but hitting all the accolades of world champion, you know, having the yachts, having the private planes, and they've become these real powerhouses within the celebrity world, not just from a sports aspect, but just being very, very popular. But I would say UFC has obviously been a newer kind of brand and hasn't been around as boxing. So some of the superstars, there's obviously a lot, but they're more in recent decades. Mm-hmm. And when I think of them, I think of the Anderson Silvas, I think of the John Jones, and then of course the one that probably most people will reference is Conor McGregor. And when you just see his status, you know, as a really good fighter, winning two belts in two different divisions, world champion on, you know, the double champ, mm-hmm. and then going on to like boxing Floyd Mayweather and developing these big brands and selling one of the brands for 180 million, etc. Is that kind of the blueprint? Is Conor McGregor a bit of a blueprint for young UFC fighters like yourself?
I think he is, but not for myself. And the reason is because when McGregor first came on the scene, he was different. You know, he was very unique. The way he talks, the way he did the trash talk, you know, he was this kind of, where's this guy come from? And I think that's what's, you know, given him so much success. But now since he's come out, everyone's trying to replicate Conor McGregor. So Conor McGregor is no longer that kind of unique trash talk style because everyone's trying to do it. And I'll be honest with you, I can't do it to save my life. You know, if you try and say to me, go and act like Conor McGregor and put on this trash talk, put on this persona, I can't do it. You know, it's not me. It will become very forced and I think people would cringe. But the reason that I think Conor McGregor's done so well is because he is unique character and he is that one of a kind. So what I try and explain to the guys in my gym is don't necessarily copy McGregor's blueprint, copy the blueprint of being yourself. Because I feel like McGregor was himself, you know, he was that sort of, there's no one like him. Now I do feel like he's gone a bit very trashy. You know, I don't necessarily have as much respect for him anymore as a person, but I do have a lot of respect of what he's done. And that's coming from someone who, when he first started, I was a big fan. You know, I was a proper McGregor fan until probably maybe the Mayweather fight. You know, I felt like when the Mayweather fight came, that was that you've made it, you don't need to do the talking anymore, but he was still doing it and a bit trashy with the words he was saying. You know, I feel like when you get to that level, you should be a role model for the younger generation, not, you know, someone that my mum would say, turn the volume down when he's talking. But yeah, you know, I think the blueprint that McGregor's shown everyone is that being that unique character, because we are all different, is what's going to get you up there. You know, obviously people want to watch him. The reason I wanted to watch him because there was no one like him. And obviously, you know, he was very good at trash talking and he's very quick with his words. And, you know, I feel like that's the blueprint now. So when I saw that, I remember when I saw how McGregor was just himself, it kind of made me think like, be like GSP. You know, GSP was one of the biggest names in the sport and he wasn't anything like McGregor. You know, he was the complete opposite, but he was one of a kind, you know, because everyone was giving it the trash talk and GSP would turn up in a suit. You know, you'd have the typical tap out and, you know, your Mohicans, and GSP would come and he was very well spoken. You know, he talked about being bullied when he was at school. And I feel like when you are your own unique character, that's when people are going to tune in. So, you know, that's what I'm just trying to portray now and put across. You know, the person you see on the social media, or, you know, the person you see when you're interviewing me, that is me. And I'd like to think people like it. And if they don't, then I'm sorry, but that's how it's going to be.
I feel like part of the reason why I slightly asked the question as well is you've got the fighting aspect, which at the time he was untouchable when he was beating everybody.
Oh, amazing.
And obviously doing you know, against Aldo, I think it was 16 seconds? 13 seconds. I mean, incredible. I remember seeing it and thinking, oh my God, like no one could have predicted that. But then over time, obviously he's lost a lot more than he's won in recent years. But still his success as an individual and his profile has blown up. I mean, proper 12, I think he sold he got $180 million out of that by selling all proportion of his shares. He's now clearly building up his, I think it's called Forged Guinness, Irish Stout, which is like another, his own version of a Guinness.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's kind of a master at marketing and public stunts, because after Anthony Joshua won, there's him pouring some of the stout into Joshua's mouth. And I don't know whether that was staged or what. And what I'm trying to say is, it's almost like when your profile gets so big and your character gets so big, the fighting is kind of secondary, and your profile, you can pivot into all these different business opportunities. And you mentioned earlier, but becoming multi-millionaire off the back end of your fighting career and also your profile. That's kind of what I'm suggesting. You know, later on, once you've done everything that you wanted to achieve in fighting, or most of it, will you use your profile to go into business opportunities?
So I'm actually already doing it, and I've been trying to promote it to people, especially the kind of, I'm only 30, you know, I feel like I'm very young in this sport, but I feel like
I'm... You've got a clothing brand, right?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm in the middle of, you know, I'm not retired and I'm not this young 20-year-old that's just starting. And I'm trying to give the best advice for the younger people that are coming up. And one of them was start businesses. Now, my businesses that I've made, they're not making me any profit, right? They're let's call them startups. I don't need to make money from them because I make my money via fighting. But I know that this career can end at any moment. You know, I've had injuries where you're out for 2 years. And that means I'm not earning anything for 2 years. So if the UFC tomorrow just said, hey, do you know what, Nath? We don't want you anymore because we don't like you. And no other promotion out there really I would want to fight on. You know, there's a couple now that are starting to come up where they probably could pay quite good money. And if so, then I would be fighting for the money. But I want to be UFC champion of the world. You know, money aside, that's my goal. So at any moment, my career could be done, over. And the thought of going back on a building site, doing something I hate, and I would not know what to do. You know, if you said to me now, right, your career's over, what are you going to do? I'm like, shit, I have nothing. So what I'm trying to do now is, whilst I'm I wouldn't even say, I'm in the public eye. You know, now that I have a platform, I'm using that now to promote my businesses. Now, what I want to do is plant these little seeds now and water them over the next, let's say 7 years till I'm 37. And then if I think, right, it's time to hang up the gloves, I can do that knowing that I've got businesses that I can afford to fall back on. My coach, Brad Pickett, he was in the UFC. You know, he was at one point number 5th in the world. Really, really talented guy. He's my coach now still.
One punch.
Yeah, you know, he's a legend in the sport. It broke my heart that he's last, I think it was just say 4 or 3 fights. He said to me, Nath, I'm done. I don't want to do these fights anymore. Like, but I have nothing else. Like, I need to earn money. He now fortunately has a gym. You know, he's set up now, so he's good. You know, money issues aren't a problem for him now. But he was, I remember looking at him once, and I went in his bathroom and he was in the bath naked and his head was down and he just looked really sad down the dumps. And he looked at me and kind of said like, I don't know what to do. And it like broke my heart because I just literally pictured myself as him. And this is before I started my businesses. And I thought, man, I don't want to be in that position where you have to fight for money. He didn't want to. He didn't want to fight anymore. He didn't want to compete anymore, but he had to. Because otherwise, how's he going to pay for his bills? You know, how's he going to pay for his kids' toys and, you know, his wife to have clothes and whatnot? And that kind of scared the hell out of me, but also then motivated me to, start the businesses now so I haven't got the pressure when I retire. And what I want to do is retire on a high. You know, I don't want to retire on 5 losses on the trot. I want to retire with a win under my belt. You know, how GSP literally done it is how I want to do it. And I think that the root to that is falling back on businesses. And I'm not stupid either. You know, we get paid good money in the UFC as far as I'm concerned, or I do anyway. You know, I don't know what everyone else is on, but I'm never going to be a multi-millionaire with the money that I'm earning, which is fine with me. You know, I know the reality, and yeah, I'm not an NBA superstar that's earning millions per game, but I can make as much as I like with businesses. You know, there's no kind of ceiling to that. So my plan is to set these up now, water them over the next 7 years and have something to fall back on, which hopefully is making me, you know, a shit ton of money. And I enjoy it as well. You know, it's like a project to me. I'm one of these people that I can't sit still for longer than an hour. So, you know, in between training sessions throughout the day, there's a lot of spare hours where, you know, if I'm just sitting there playing the PlayStation, I feel guilty. So, you know, having these business to kind of fall back on and do stuff with my time, you know, it's keeping me active, and I don't see it as work. I just see it as fun.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to this other interview that you did, and if I'm correct in saying, Nathaniel, you started your clothing company to challenge other sports brands, but it wasn't for the need of doing it. It was basically to pass a bit of time, because in the morning you would train, in the afternoon you'd probably be resting or doing something, you know, casual. And then over an evening you'll be training. So during the day, rather than kind of do nothing or focus on probably the wrong thing at times, focus on the business. Is that where it came from, just to fill that void?
100%. You know, when I started my kind of anxiety journey, shall I say, where I was kind of diagnosed with it, I'd noticed that at my worst times was when I was in between training sessions. You know, at the time I was traveling up to North London to train. So from where I was, it was an hour and a half there and an hour and a half back. So other than the session, that's 3 hours spent on my own, on the train. At the time, I didn't bring a book, didn't have my headphones in. And I would just be sitting there, just letting my thoughts go away with me. And that's where I feel like that put me at my worst kind of stage in life. And that's what kind of brought the anxiety triggers on. So one of the key things for me, and that my dad noticed and that the doctors noticed, was that keeping busy mentally is what helps me stay out of them anxious, depressive states. So yeah, now, you know, you'll never see me just chilling mentally, you know. Sometimes when I go on holiday, I'm a bit anxious that I'm not going to be doing enough stuff to keep my mind occupied. And obviously where I train in between them sessions, I have to rest physically. So now, So now that's why mentally, you know, I've got the businesses, I try to read. You know, I've only got one game that I kind of put on the PlayStation sometimes, which actually keeps my mind occupied. It's like a tactical game. Other than that, I just go away with the fairies. And doing things like this, you know, doing the podcast. While I'm talking to you, I'm not thinking about other stuff that's going to put me in a bad state of mind. So, you know, I definitely think that keeping mentally active is key. And trust me, trying to start business is definitely going to keep you mentally busy at all times.
Yeah. I had I don't know if you know him, it's a guy called Alfie Best.
Yeah.
He's traveller, made a huge...
I follow him on Instagram.
Huge amount of money. He's been on my podcast twice, so has his son. And I think it was actually his son echoed a saying that his dad told him when he was younger, which goes like this: the devil makes work of idle hands. And it's so true. Like, if you're sitting there over the weekend, you've got nothing to do, and I can imagine a lot of young, successful, alpha type men fall into this trap, which is, I don't know what to do, I'll go down the pub, and they end up drinking, they end up doing other stuff, they end up having a fight, or they end up pursuing something they shouldn't be pursuing. If you've got a lifestyle, whether that's boxing, MMA, pursuing business, learning an instrument, learning a new language, the devil can't get into you because you haven't got idle hands. You're always focused on something. And I even try and remind myself of that, saying it every so often, because there are moments I'm sitting there thinking, what should I do? And before you know it, your mind wanders up into a load of rubbish. So look, going back to your journey then, the fighting journey, my question to you is this: what I said earlier about all the glitz and the glamour with boxing, I'm 37, so I know you're a bit younger than me, but you probably, growing up, have seen all these talented boxers making a huge amount of money and making a big name for themselves. Why didn't that sort of attract you more than going into MMA and therefore the UFC? Why didn't you become a professional boxer?
So one thing with boxing is I feel like it's a sport that you have to start at such an early age. And I feel like there's a lot more involved that's not just about being a good boxer. So what I mean by that is it's a lot more political. You have to sell tickets. I know that for a fact. I know Southern area champions that, were stressing about money because they couldn't sell enough tickets, and they were being, nudged a bit by the promoters, let's say. In the UFC, I can't get the tickets. I get given a couple of tickets for my family members, and then I have friends, family messaging me saying, mate, have you got tickets? And I'm like, bro, I can't get none. Literally, I can get you a link. But then if you're going to buy the tickets, there's probably people selling them on the Ticketmasters for like triple prices. You don't have to, You don't have to worry about that stuff with MMA. In the UFC, it's literally fight the best guys on the planet. That's all you got to do. Train, stay healthy, don't get injured, don't take drugs, because we get tested, don't take steroids, illegal substances. Turn up on the night, fight one of the best guys on the planet, and that's all we want from you. Whereas with boxing, I feel like it's more, hey, we need you to sell the fight. The UFC sells the event itself. And I realised that the other day when I went to the AJ fight on the weekend. Until I think the Derek Chisora fight, which was co-main, I think I was right, there was empty seats everywhere. Now, it was a sold-out arena, but boxing, I called it a main event sport, because no one's there. They're only there to see, let's say, Derek Chisora and Anthony Joshua. Whereas the UFC, it doesn't matter who they have on, they're going to sell out, because people say, you going to the UFC event? What are you doing on the weekend? I'm going to the UFC event. With boxing, it's not. It's, are you going to the AJ fight? Or, you're going to Derek Chisora's fight? And I feel like now with the UFC, that's why the UFC is so powerful, because they don't rely on the fighters. They have promotion and they have the name themselves. So, I kind of went off a little bit there, but I think that's why the UFC is so powerful now, and that they can literally just put on the fights they want. They don't need journeymen.
Yeah, but going back on the question slightly, and there's obviously probably a greater reason why you started it, but part of your skill set is you have to be a good boxer. You also have to be a good grappler. You have to be good on the floor. You have to be good at Thai fighting. Wouldn't it be easier in some senses just to learn that one craft and do all the same sort of training and all the same sort of dedication, go out there and maybe excel quicker? Or doesn't it really work like that?
So it's a tricky one, because with the boxing, obviously you've only got one discipline, but so's your opponent. So, you might have done 10 years of boxing, but your opponent's also done 10 years of boxing. So you're both on that same kind of level. With MMA, what I like is you've got the plan B. So, okay, I come out, let's say I feel like I'm the better striker than my opponent. Let's just say he hurts me. He throws a lucky shot, catches me. I can take him down. I can clinch, I can go up against the cage. I've got so many different forms of winning. It's so more natural. So with boxing as well, obviously you knock me down. Let's say it's a lucky shot. You get a lucky shot, I get 10 seconds to recover. Right, okay, now I'm not going to let you have that. So I can make mistakes, let's say, in boxing. What I love about MMA is you cannot make a mistake. With a 4-ounce glove, if you land a lucky shot, I'm out cold. You could completely knock me out. I could end up in a submission by pure luck. And that's what I like about the sport. It's the blessing and the curse, let's say. There's so many ways that you can lose. It's like a chess match. And I think that's what makes it more exciting, is that it is that anything can happen. And, I don't know anyone that would, I don't see why anyone would bet on MMA, because literally you could have the best fighter on the planet fight someone that's nowhere near ranked as him and still come out the loser.
Guys, I wanted to hop on here to once again thank the sponsors of this week's podcast, iSecure Vehicles. When we were searching around for sponsors for the channel, we honestly wanted to get a brand, a company that will give massive amount of value to our audience, and that is definitely iSecure Vehicles. They have a wide range of products which are designed to keep your vehicle, your asset, safe and secure. Some of those products are dash cameras, undetected immobilizers, and car tracking systems. Head over to iSecure to look at their products and make sure you say that the Stephen Sullys Study podcast sent you there. Have you ever watched a UFC fight where you thought to yourself on this tone or on this note that if I had £1 million to place a bet today, I would definitely put it on this person because I feel they're going to win because of their winning streak, etc. Have you ever watched a fight, assumed someone's going to win, and actually they got KO'd? Never.
And you look at the prime example, McGregor versus Aldo. Yeah. Everyone, I actually will stand to this day and say that I had McGregor winning, not like he did, but everyone was saying how Aldo is one of the best pound for pound fighters on the planet. He was the guy that just smashed everyone. And then here's McGregor coming along. No one thought he was going to beat him, and he done it in 13 seconds. Literally landed that one punch, and then got the knockout win. So, I think that sort of speaks volumes in that this sport, anything can happen.
Do you know, so off air we were speaking before we started, we were talking about the money side of stuff, and we've touched on it already slightly about building up your profile, obviously making money from the fights, but really and truly where you're going to become a self-made millionaire, someone that is uber successful, kind of probably isn't from the fighting. It's going to be from the money that you make from the fighting, and then you invest it into businesses or assets, and that's how you become very successful. Conor McGregor, right? Okay, let's look at the two people that dominate a sport. Mayweather in boxing, he's getting 300 million a fight for Pacquiao, and something very similar when he fought McGregor. And then, there's been other times where he's got tens of millions by fighting Canelo Alvarez and Oscar De La Hoya. I mean, he's grossed over $1 billion in his lifetime. And then you got Conor McGregor, who makes a huge amount of money from fighting now because of his profile. A lot of young fighters, boxers or MMA fighters will look at that and kind of see it as a bit of a blueprint, but also a bit of a goal, and think, right, I'm going to go out there and start making myself millions and millions of dollars from fighting and become famous. The reality is there's only a few people that make it to the top who even come close to making that kind of money. So along the way, can you give us a bit of an insight to the kind of money that some fighters will be getting in their first few fights, how the bonus structures are, what is on the line, how much risk there is, and then once you actually get that money, how it's broken down to taxes, sports therapy, your trainer, nutritionist, give us a real breakdown to hit home to the audience the realities of the finances in your first few fights.
So if you're just purely fighting, so my motivation when I started was that I want to do this for a living. That was literally it. But it wasn't for the glitz and the glam. It was because I just wanted to be an athlete. That's what, I was passionate about. But what I say to people is that for the first, 9 years of my career, I didn't have a pot to piss in. I was a Cage Warriors world champion, and I think I got 1,500 quid to fight. Luckily, I sold a lot of tickets at that time. So, you know, I probably made a couple grand on tickets. But let's just say I did that 3 times a year, which was being the champ, a world champion. That's 15 grand a year. I think I earn more in McDonald's if I went to work there. My first professional fight, I think it was 100 quid. Sorry, I'm coughing so much, don't I? There is no money in the sport until you get to the big time. When I got to the UFC, I can't actually remember now. I think it was 10 and 10 or 12 and 12, which is kind of like the standard pay bracket. And what I explain to people is that the UFC, when you get to UFC, you haven't made it, far from it, but you've made a platform that you now potentially could make it. So my debut, let's just say it was 10 and 10. If I lost, it would have been $10,000, which in English currency is what, 8.5 grand, something like that. You got 20% for your manager. You've still got to pay your taxes. So I literally, if I had lost my UFC debut, would have walked around with probably in my pocket, let's say £4,000, which is nothing. You know, if I did that 3 times a year, that's £12,000. Like, who's going to live off that? But if you win in the UFC, you always get double. So my contract, I think, let's say it was 10,000. I won. So I got 20,000. Luckily, I got the bonus, which was performance of the night bonus, which was 50,000. So I literally had in my bank, let's say a week later, £40,000, which to me was like, oh my gosh. You know, I'd never had more than 200 quid in my bank, you know, because the 1,500 quid that I would have earned on Cage Warriors would have gone straight to, you know, the bills that I owe my mum and dad, or, you know, things that I had to buy. And all of a sudden I've got 40 grand in my bank. Like, that's it. I've deducted the taxes. Everything's paid for. I think the tax was paid in America at the time. I didn't know what to do. I thought I was rich. You know, I thought I made it. But then in hindsight now, I realize, you know, it's not actually that much money when you look at it. The structure with the UFC is that at the time I was signed on a 4-fight contract. So if you get 10 and 10 and you win, it goes 12 and 12. If you win, it goes 14. So every fight goes up a couple thousand. And then before your last fight, we renegotiate the contract. I think I was undefeated on my first contract. So then I went up to around like the 26 mark. And again, I was sitting there thinking, you're telling me that to win a fight, I'm going to make $52,000, and I do this for fun. You know, as long as I was making ends meet, I was happy to do this for a living. And now you're talking about serious money as far as I'm concerned. Now, you know, I'm on, I think the fight I just done was 45 and 45. So that's 90 grand with a potential bonus. That's 140 grand for one night's work. If you do that 3 times a year,
it's good money.
It's good money. But if you win, you know, obviously if you lose, you get half. People forget so my friends once said to me, mate, you're paying for the dinner tonight. And I went, why? They went, you've just got 50,000 quid in your bank. I said, yeah, but you're forgetting I do have to pay tax. I do have to pay my manager's cut. I do have to pay my coaches some money. You know, they don't actually charge me fortunes, but you know, you've got stuff to pay. I've got to pay the camp. And if I've got 40 grand, so I'm kind of going all over the place now, but there was one fight I had. It was versus Casey Kenny, and I lost, and I thought I won, so I was pissed. And I think I got 26,000, and then luckily I got the bonus. So we both got fight of the night bonus. And then in my bank, let's say I had 40 grand from that fight. So my friends are sitting there thinking, mate, you got 40 grand there. But I then didn't fight for 2 years. So I had to live off that 40 grand for 2 years, which is 20 grand a year, which isn't nowhere near rich or made it. I said to my mates, I said, look, explain your wages to me. And I said, you earn more than me. So then they started to kind of go, oh, okay, you got a point. Because that's what people forget. You know, you get paid in big chunks in the UFC, but if you go and spunk that money, what are you going to live on? You know, unfortunately, I do have some good sponsors which pretty much just cover my monthly rent and outgoings. But you won't see me, you know, splashing cash. Because as far as I'm concerned, I need to hold on to that until my next fight. So since then, I have now kind of with the mindset of, you know, invest my money and stuff. And that's why I started the businesses, because, you know, this money's great when we get paid. But if you don't fight, you don't get paid. And, you know, you can sit on 40 grand. It will go pretty quick, you know, if you're not earning any more money.
And by your own businesses, is there a way of topping up that kind of money? So, for example, I used an athlete that is a bit of a unicorn, but is someone that everyone will know. Ronaldo, obviously, he's gone to a Saudi Arabia football team, earning a lot of money. But then on top of that, he has someone like a Nike endorsing him 100 million a year or something like that. So regardless whether he kicks a football, scores a goal, or helps his team win, Nike are going to be paying him a shit ton of money. Do you have the same advantages as a footballer?
No. So the sponsors, I've all got myself. I don't have, I have a manager, but my sponsors I've got myself. And, occasionally you might get one or two here or there from your managers, but it all depends on you as an athlete. So in the UFC now, we can't have logos on our shorts. So if you said, for example, hey, now if I want to sponsor you, but I want my logo on your shorts, I can't do that because the uniform now in the UFC is Venom. That's what we have to wear. Now, I'm fortunate enough that I've got a lot of sponsors that they believe in me as a person and they like to financially back me. And they know that they're not necessarily getting much from it, but they're, a part of it now. They're no longer just a fan. They're my sponsors. I've got people coming to my wedding that started off as just a sponsor and then we've become friends from it. And I'm fortunate enough to have that. And I do get monthly, let's just say it's, I think, £1,800 a month that I get through sponsorships. That's about 5 sponsors. So that's far from Ronaldo, but it's something. There's some people out there that don't have any sponsors. And then there's some people out there that I know that are on about 100 grand a year just on sponsors. So it's very much, when it comes to sponsorships in the UFC, it's about who you know, really. A lot of my sponsors are just people that luckily I was introduced to by, and they said, yeah, mate, I've got, fortunately, a few quid to give you, and we want to be a part of it and we want to back you, but I haven't necessarily got contracts in with them, so at any moment they could just say, if you're injured, you're not fighting, I don't want to sponsor you. Whereas with Ronaldo, I assume they have some proper contracts in place, and it's a little bit more professional. So yeah, MMA is a scary sport when it comes to financial. And now there are more opportunities than when I first started. There's more promotions out there now. And I would say to people that you can always fall back on coaching. So I do the occasional personal training with people. And that, again, is just to kind of keep me busy.
Yeah. You mentioned about scary moments and also the fear, and it's predominantly circulating injuries. Now, you mentioned that you were out for 2 years. What was the injury and how was you mentally when you was off for 2 years? So
the first injury was coming out of that fight. They never actually properly diagnosed me. It still hurts now, but there was a tendon and a ligament, and I had torn the tendon, or I'd torn the ligament, and the other one I'd split down the middle. So that put me out for about a year. Then I had to obviously get back into everything. So, I think I had a fight booked, which was, let's say, in 3 months' time. A month out, I went and broke the metacarpal. So in the same hand, but a different injury. That put me out for 4 months. So then by the time I fought, I think it had been 21 months, almost 2 years, with no money, nothing, and those 2 years, they weren't coming straight off the Casey Kenny fight that I had. It wasn't, I wasn't too down in the dumps because I never knew how long I would be sitting out for. But when I broke the metacarpal, I was sitting there thinking I might just try and go and become a postman or something, because I was thinking, the luck's not on my side. I'll just keep getting injured. And fortunately, I never actually went and got that postman job. I went back to training and, got on with it. But it was mentally a little bit of a dark place because this is what I do, and if you take away what I do every day, there's not much left for me to do. So that's why I spent a lot more time trying to work on my businesses when I was injured. But yeah, it can be a very boring, dark place. Yeah.
I heard you was 4 weeks out from a fight and split your knee open as well. And you had to call off that fight. Talk to me about that. It sounded horrific. You hit a corner
like this, like a lip.
Yeah, on the mat, and it was the wooden kind of, I don't want to call it post, but it was like on the lip on the outside of the mat.
Yeah, so imagine this table here is a trim going around some mats. So this is all matted area. There was a tiny little bit of mat that I guess had just dropped down. I'd shot in for a takedown, and as I've landed, I've literally hit my knee and degloved the knee. So the skin just pulled back. Man, I don't know what's going on with me today. I'm coughing all over the place now.
So good.
And literally, I had my knee bent. I landed on the floor. It didn't really hurt, but I thought, oh shit, that didn't feel good. I literally can explain it as it felt like someone pulling my leg skin down. And I looked, saw everything, saw the bone. And straight to A&E, 14 stitches later, and this was a month before a fight. And yeah, I couldn't train. So they said, it's almost a bit annoying that it wasn't more severe. So they said to me, look, you've got 14 stitches. I think they said it's about a month and then you should go back to training. But, I can't fight with no training. So unfortunately, I had to pull out of that one. And, like I said earlier, I don't get paid. So I had spent all this money on my training camp. The build-up was great. I was going to go in there and as far as I was concerned, smash the fight. And now I'm looking on the sidelines, not being able to earn any money and back injured again. But, fortunately, it wasn't nothing too serious. It was just basically a big gash on my knee. And, I was able to go back to training after a month.
Yeah. In UFC, in MMA, I feel that some of the fighters that I've certainly been around, not that I've ever really done MMA, I'm obviously more of a boxing background, but I've seen some of the fighters back in the day, I felt they were slightly wired different. They were like animals, especially when I was younger. I feel like they really would love to fight. Whereas boxers, there's obviously you would come across the occasional boxer who loved to scrap, but they were more about the art of maybe boxing. Would you say you have to be slightly wired different to be an MMA fighter, someone that really likes to have a fight? Or no, there's actually a lot more skill involved and you have to be more skillful than the mindset of a fighter?
No, I definitely think you have to be more skilled now. And if anything, you just have to be very intelligent because it is literally a human game of chess. Now, like chess, when the people that you see play chess are usually very clever, very switched on. It's exactly the same. Back in the day, it was a bit more cage fighting, if you like. It was that kind of who's the harder bloke. And, you could kind of rely on your athleticism a bit. But now, you have to be very switched on. Even in the training, the training approach, you need strength conditioning, you need nutritionists, you can't just rely on being able to throw a shot. And the sport in jiu-jitsu, judo, you have to be shown this. Growing up as a kid, I could always kind of throw a jab. My dad said, all right, this is a 1-2, this is a hook. You kind of, everyone kind of knows how to throw a punch, or I'd like to think so. With jiu-jitsu, you won't know anything. It's like learning a new language. If I don't show you a submission, I'm pretty sure that you're not going to know how to do any of it. So if I said to you now, right, throw me a punch, someone will know exactly what to do. If I said to you, show me a full guard sweep, most people would say, I don't have a clue what that is. So that's the thing that MMA now is a little bit different, I think, to boxing, is that a lot of it you have to be taught as opposed to just kind of relying on natural athleticism.
Yeah. So it reminds me of Chuck Liddell back in the day, who was mostly a stand-up fighter, knockout artist, and he just reminded me of a pure brute, someone that would just have it. It didn't matter who he'd fight, and he would just fight you. And then fast forward the clocks, people like a GSP, who are a lot more methodical in their approach and a lot more tactful and a lot more skillful. So in your own arsenal, in your own game, Nathaniel, what would you say your complete strengths and maybe some of your weaknesses in your MMA game?
So I definitely would say I'm a striker, and I actually started with jiu-jitsu. So I feel like my grappling is just as good as my striking, but the reason I say I'm a striker is because I prefer to do that. And it's not because I prefer it, it's because I know that the crowd want to see that. And I kind of pride myself on being an entertaining fighter. So, if you said to me now, right, just out of your own fun, it's just you and me here, shall we have a spar boxing or jiu-jitsu? I'd probably say the jiu-jitsu is going to be more fun. But I know that the crowd, for them to watch it, they're not going to want to watch that. They're going to want to see knockouts. They want to see guys, going toe-to-toe. And that's what I kind of pride myself on. And that's what I want to be known for. So because I because I prefer to strike in my fights, I would say that that's what I'm better at. Although I'm still just as good as jiu-jitsu and with my grappling. So yeah, I would say I'm a striker, but I would say that skill-wise, I'm well-rounded.
Okay. So the other big brand is Bellator. UFC Bellator, who do you think is the better brand? Who produces the better fighters?
So UFC, without a doubt. And with Bellator, I actually fought on Bellator once before. And believe it or not, I got paid $1,800. So that just goes to show the difference. I was like one of the first fights on the card, but I feel like with Bellator, they're a very good promotion depending on who you are. So, with the UFC, the whole kind of, as I said, the UFC sells itself. With Bellator, they kind of need the fighter. So a big one was MVP, Michael Venom Page. People would go to watch him. I know people that are like, oh, mate, you're going to go to the MVP fight. They're not sitting there saying, you're going to go to the Bellator show. So, yeah, I would definitely say the UFC is the premiership. That is the number one. If you're the UFC champion of the world, you are number one on the planet. If you're Bellator champion, you're very good. Don't get me wrong. You're very talented, but you're not the UFC champion.
And, okay, so you had that one fight for Bellator. Was there ever a consideration in your own mind that you would sign with them?
At the time, I remember thinking if the money was right, and I remember thinking that it's a done deal if you win, and I won, and nothing came about. So, as far as I was concerned, they lost out because, if they had offered me a contract, I would have taken it, but they didn't. And Cage Warriors came along, and Cage Warriors, they didn't pay me the greatest, but they kind of said, look, we'll promote you. And I looked at the bigger picture. So I knew that with their backing and their promotion, I would be able to get to the UFC. And, for me, it was all about the bigger picture. All I wanted to do is get to the UFC. And I knew that Cage Warriors would get me there. Whereas with Bellator, they would want to keep me. They would want to obviously tie me down on contracts because they are a bigger promotion. So, yeah, I'd like to think that I took the right the route and, I got there to the UFC in the end.
And Conor McGregor had already done a bit of a blueprint as well by becoming a double champ at Cage Warriors. You also become a champ, and obviously then you go on to the UFC. One of the, I wouldn't say, I don't want to call it a highlight, but something that must have made you feel super good at the time is when you fought on the undercard of Darren Till and Masvidal, because that was a massive fight. That were two very big names in 2019. What was it like having a bit of a insight to the bigger kind of picture with UFC, with these two massive names fighting each other?
So for me, that was a big turning point because I had never fought in an arena like that in my hometown. So my UFC debut and my second UFC fight, they were obviously big arenas, but they weren't in my hometown. So I didn't have the crowd behind me. When I came out to the UFC London at the O2, man, that was special. I'll explain it. I remember coming out and just thinking there's 20,000 people in here and they're all up on their feet. They're all clapping when I got the win. And that for me was that kind of moment where I made it, So yeah, obviously being on that card was huge, and being on the main card and, having like Darren Till headline it and stuff, that was pretty surreal. And yeah, that's a moment that stayed with me for the rest of my life. And
how does it feel being the only UFC Londoner current fighter on their roster?
It's a good feeling. And, like I said earlier with pressure, it's added pressure when they come to London, but I do thrive under that pressure. And I'm hoping they don't sign any more London guys other than my teammates, just because I want to be selfish and say, I am the only UFC London fighter. And I feel like they should use that more. I feel like they should promote me more. Obviously, London's the capital, and obviously the UFC always do the shows in London. So, I feel like they should promote me more as the London boy.
Have you met Dana White a few times and chatted to him? And, what's he like as an individual?
Mate, my experience with Dana, he's good as gold. I had a fight in London where the guy pulled out the day before. And unfortunately, I couldn't fight. It was too late. So I saw Dana, and they didn't actually have to pay me anything. I saw Dana, I said, my position, I said, like, mate, I was gutted, I couldn't fight on the card, I sort of hinted, is there a little bit of compensation, to obviously cover some expenses? And he just said to me, like, what are you on, buddy? Like, what's your fight person? I think it was 29 and 29. He just tapped me on the shoulder, said, mate, I'll pay you everything. And the win bonus. So, yeah, my experience with Dana, I think he's a very, very nice man. I've had very good experiences with him. I know a lot of people give him stick, and I don't know him well enough to say that, who he is as a person. But all I can say is that my experience with him and Brad Pickett, who's my coach, who I trust, very much. So if Brad says good things about someone, for me, that's also a positive. And yeah, I see him as a very good businessman. I know a lot of people don't necessarily like him, but I can only speak highly of him from my own experiences.
I've listened to countless podcasts with him and different talks. He's been on, things like Tony Robbins, podcasts or talks. He sat down with, some amazing people. Grant Cardone's also interviewed him. And I feel like what you see is kind of what you get. He's a very successful business person. I think he's a billionaire. He's built one of the biggest fighting brands in the world. And he also looks after himself. There was a point in his life where he got a little bit overweight, and it seems like in the last few years he's been on this pursuit of becoming uber fit and the best version of himself. And you can't knock someone like that. He's hungry. He wants the UFC to be even better over the years, and I just admire that as a business person myself. One last talk about the actual sort of inside the UFC. Another big profile that is always around is Joe Rogan, who's the commentator and also sometimes the host. Have you ever met him? Have you ever come across him? What's he like?
I've only met him briefly, and that was just at the weigh-in, so I can't say I've had a conversation with him, but, I shook his hand, and I think I said it's an honour to meet you or something cheesy like that. And yeah, I'm a big fan of him. I listen to his podcasts, but not religiously, but I've listened to a lot of his podcasts, and, I remember watching him when he was on Fear Factor. So yeah, it's nice to see how successful he's doing.
Yeah. Your take on the Jake Paul era, obviously being a fighter. I've spoken to a lot of my guests, a lot of boxers about this, but never a UFC fighter. So Jake Paul has obviously had this bit of a plan to go into boxing and start attacking former UFC fighters, and so far he's beaten them all. Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz. What was your kind of thoughts and feelings with that fight and then also the result?
So I was in no doubt that Jake was going to win because it's a boxing fight. I think the Jake Paul thing that's going on, I think is damaging boxing. I don't think it's damaging MMA at all, other than you might get people thinking, he keeps beating up MMA fighters. Boxers must be like better than MMA, but he's beating MMA fighters in a boxing ring. The reason why I don't think it's good for boxing is because it's taken the limelight away from the high level guys. Seeing Jake Paul just smash MMA fighters is probably more entertaining for people than it is watching two high level boxers going 12 rounds, going to the decision. So, you've obviously got your true passionate boxing fans who will always stay with the sport. But, I do think, sorry, it's not even really Jake Paul's ruining it, because I think Jake Paul is taking boxing very, very seriously, which is why I knew that he would beat Nate Diaz, because, I can see how serious he's taken the sport. But it's the YouTube boxing that's come from that kind of Jake Paul thing. I saw one the other day, and I didn't see the fight, but this girl just pulled her top up after the fight and got her boobs out, and it was on this misfits thing or
boxing,
something.
yeah.
And I saw another one where there was two massive fat guys just fighting, and I was like, don't quote me on it, but I think it was the same show, and I just thought, how is this even happening? Do you know what I mean? You've gone from having the best boxers on the planet. You've got Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali. You've got all of these absolute legends in the sport that people have heard of. And now it's Jake Paul, and I know there's a porn star doing it now, and it's just a bit mad to me. I think it is damaging boxing as a sport, but I do get it. If people are paying for it as a business, why wouldn't you do it? So, yeah, it's a funny old time.
And it obviously partly started with the Mayweather and McGregor fight back in 2017, I think it was. And now this year, we're going to be seeing Fury against Ngannou. What's your take on Fury fighting the former heavyweight UFC champion of the world?
Again, I don't like it, man. I really hope that Francis Ngannou can just pull it off, but it's a boxing event. I think Tyson Fury is just going to box his head off. I think it's the same as saying you've got a badminton player that's going to go up against a tennis player. The sports are similar. It's a combat sport, but it is completely different. So, I'm not against it because I get it. It's money, and Francis Ngannou's earning a hell of a lot of money for it. So it's only good for him. But yeah, I'm not a fan of it.
The sort of glad you touched on slightly the financial side of things, because the two things I was going to say is Ngannou has come out, stated a few times, even before he actually officially quit the UFC, that he wasn't being paid enough. I think I saw a statistic that for his fights, he was getting roughly $500,000. Now, don't get me wrong. In the real world, $500,000, even if you fight once a year, is 3-4 times someone's annual wage and sometimes beyond that. So it's good money, don't get me wrong. But for what he does and for how short the career is and how risky it is, it kind of isn't a lot of money. Even if you fought twice in a year, got $1 million, and let's just say, basically half of that might go in taxes, training, management, etc. It's not actually a huge amount of money. And then you've got Jake Paul being very outlandish with his comments and talking about Dana White a lot of the time. Part of the reason why he's doing what he's doing and having this voice is because he's saying that Dana White, the UFC, doesn't pay his athletes enough money. Can you see where they're both coming from, or do you feel like they're just kind of nitpicking at certain scenarios? So
I think it's knowing your worth. So I'm humble enough to know that the UFC could get rid of me tomorrow and do absolutely just fine. They're not going to lose out on anything other than maybe a couple of my fans going, oh, I'm not watching that anymore. I get paid, as far as I'm concerned, very good money for the level I'm at. Now, in 2 years' time, when I'd like to think I'm UFC champion of the world and I'm selling out arenas, I'm selling cards, pay-per-view, people are purely coming to see me, then that's when I'm going to want more money. And as far as I'm concerned, if I'm getting a cut of the pay-per-view, that's where things get fair. So I think it's knowing your worth, which is the first thing. When I made my UFC debut, $10,000 to fight, that's not a lot of money at all. But the UFC don't need me, And I guess it's no different from, I don't know, you get a job at Starbucks and all you are is the trainee, you're just learning. You're not going to be on much money. But if you work your way up, and I guess then you're manager at the store, you're going to get more money. And it's the same kind of thing. I think a lot of people are moaning and on Twitter about how much the UFC guys get paid that make their debuts. But then, so I think John Jones was moaning because, I don't know, he didn't get 10 million. Who needs 10 million quid per fight? I think that's ridiculous. I came out with something once and said, instead of paying footballers what they get paid, I think Ronaldo's on like $500 million a year. Paid emergency services more money. And, everyone gave me stick for it and said, oh, you're just, trying to get in Dana White's back pocket and all that, like he's going to see my messages. But it's true, I feel like if I was to moan because I'm not getting paid £1 million per fight, which I would love to get, by the way, I'd love to have £1 million per fight, I'm going to despise the sport, because I'm going to be sitting there thinking, right, I'm not getting paid £1 million, I'm only getting paid 45 and 45. You're never going to be happy. So I just remind myself that I am on, last year, I think I took home in the whole year about $210,000, which compared to when I was labouring was, it would have took me, I don't know, 5 years? No, more. It would have took me a long time to earn that. So I'm very grateful for the money that I am on. Obviously my position may change in a couple of years. And, I think for Francis Ngannou, yes, if he was on $500,000 a fight and he's selling out cards, I think he should have got more money. But I don't know the ins and outs, if he's getting a cut of pay-per-view, and stuff like that. But, he's obviously getting paid a shit ton now. And, I think Nate Diaz apparently just got paid 10 mil to fight Jake Paul. But I think that's disgusting money. You're telling me you get paid 10 million quid to box what people were calling a YouTuber. When my dad was in the fire brigade, he's risking his life to earn 35,000 quid a year. You know, it's ridiculous as far as I'm concerned to earn that much money, but I'm not going to turn it away. You know, obviously, if someone said to me, we're going to pay you 10 mil to fight, man, come on, of course I'm going to take it. But to moan that I'm not getting paid that much or something like that, you know, I do think is a bit crazy, but yeah.
It also does show the excitement that if you build up your profile enough, regardless whether, you know, you come out the UFC on a high or not, if you've got such a much of a profile, then the likes of these kind of celebrity boxing matches or other things can manifest itself, and you can earn some serious money. And I guess it's no different to like China or over now in Saudi Arabia, that they're homing in, I mean, even America with Messi, they're homing in on these big profile names that they're still very good footballers, but they're coming at the back end of their career and they're kind of homing in and paying them huge amount of money just to go over and sign for a couple of years and do what they do best. And that kind of is the exciting thing about building up your own profile as a UFC fighter.
Yeah, I think once you've got a profile, is money can be made anywhere. You know, if you've got 1 million followers on Instagram, that's 1 million potential customers. You know, if you bring out a drinks brand, that's 1 million potential people that are going to buy your drinks brand. So if you sell that drink for £5, that's potentially 5 million quid you're going to make. That's how I see it. You know, I see every Instagram follower as a potential customer. And then obviously you're going to get more sponsorships. So I do try and say to the up and coming fighters now in my gym that, look, you do need to be able to fight, obviously, to make it in the UFC, but build your profile and that will help and, you know, boost your net worth, if you like.
Definitely. A couple more things I just want to ask you, Nathaniel. So McGregor versus Chandler, I think it's kind of been announced now. It's going to be happening over in December. And McGregor had those 2 back-to-back losses against Poirier. And obviously the last one was horrendous where he snapped his leg basically in half. But then since then, he's had all this success in the business world. My question to you as a current UFC fighter is, when someone's made that much money and when someone's actually had a very bad, kind of can be life-changing injury,
yeah,
are you the same fighter? Do you have the same hunger? Do you have a little bit of anxiety that same injury could come back?
So I don't think he's the same fighter that he was, but I can tell that he's a fighter that loves the glitz and the glam, you know, like we said earlier, because you have got enough money to just ride off into the sunset. As far as I'm concerned, I love the money that would come with the fame, but I don't want fame. I would hate to be in a restaurant with my wife and kids and have paparazzi. You know, I would hate to be bombarded at a cinema, you know, or something like that. So for me, I want the money that comes with the fame, but I don't actually want the fame. So kind of bittersweet. Whereas with McGregor, he obviously likes that fame. You know, he likes that attention. Even the other day at the boxing, you know, you could kind of see that, you know, he wants the attention. You know, the fights were going on and he's up shadow boxing, and, you know, how he poured that drink in Anthony Joshua's mouth. I was like, I get it. You know, you're selling your brand, but I just saw it so distasteful. You know, I was like, let the guy have his moment. And, you know, for me, I cringed, but it's everywhere now. On Instagram, everyone has shared McGregor pouring the drink in Anthony Joshua's mouth. You know, he then had like a beef with KSI as Anthony Joshua was trying to talk with him. And again, I was like, man, just give the guy his moment. But he wants to be in that limelight. And I give it to him. It's working. He's got 50 million followers on Instagram. So, you know, what he does sells. And I can completely get it. So, yeah, you know, I think sometimes it's the fame that they're after. But me, I think at that point, I would still train, but I wouldn't train as hard. So, you know, I can't say how hard he's training, but I'm sure there isn't that same grit and determination as there was 10 years ago.
You mentioned about fame as well. I know, let's just say there's the Conor McGregor's famous, and then there's you know, as the list goes down, you know, there's obviously well-known fighters, And if you're like a noob, if you're like a proper fan of UFC, you're going to know pretty much every single fighter in there. And then when you become celebrity kind of famous, you can walk down the street and regardless whether that person's a fan of UFC, boxing or football, they know you just because you're famous. I mean, you mentioned you don't really know too much about the art world, but if I said Picasso and Banksy, these are two names pretty much you're guaranteed to know because they're bigger than art. They're their own big brand. You must have had a bit of a taste in it though, because there must be, when you're in London, your hometown, or when you go to these boxing fights or UFC fights, and even if you're not competing, people must come over to you. What's that like being known, having a bit of taste of fame and the celebrity type world?
So the best ones is I've been jogging once and someone goes, "You're right, champ, like, let's go, champ," or something like that. You know, good luck on your next fight. I love them. You know, when none bothered me, they'll stop me. I went to the museum once with my missus, something to do on a day off. And as I walked in, someone walked out and just went, "Good luck next week, mate." And I was like, "Thanks, mate." You know what I mean? I appreciate that. Then you get the ones, let's call them you go to the pub, they're drunk and they're chewing down my ear. They're spitting all over me, telling me how good I am. And I'm one of these people, if you ask me, "Oh, you good at MMA?" I'll say, "I'm all right." You know, I don't like...
Humble.
I don't like to boast. And if anything, just detrimental. If you said to me, sell your teammate, I'll be like, "Oh, he's the best thing ever." You know, I'll be really good at selling. I'm good at selling myself to like a sponsor, let's say, when it comes to business, because I don't look at myself as I'm talking about me. I look at it as we're talking on a business level now. So I'm talking about me as a business. But when it comes to just people, I cringe when they give me compliments. You know, I've had it before. We was at Winter Wonderland in London. We was having a drink, me, my missus, my mate, and his girlfriend. And this lad come up to me and he was drunk and he was all over me. And it was fun. And it was like, "Oh, you all right, mate? Yeah, nice to meet you. Shake hands." And then I couldn't stop cringing. And he was going to my girlfriend, "You must love getting in bed with him," and all this. And he's like, "I'm not gay, but I would shag him." And I was just like, "Mate, I'm cringing, you know, please just stop." It was, but I can't ask him to stop because it's like, you're being nice to me, but now I'm thinking, go away. Do you know what I mean? I'd rather you actually insult me so I can actually say to you, "Get away from me now," because that's all I wanted to say, but I couldn't. And he didn't go. He brought his missus over, and sat with us. And, you know, his missus was, I think, even looking like, you know, he was looking at her going, "Do you know who this is?" And I'm like I could see she didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
And it's too much. It's far too much for me. And I know some people would probably love that. They'd be like, "Yeah, I'm the boy." You know what I mean? But for me, I was cringing the whole time. And I get like that even if someone just compliments me. You know, if I came in and you said, "Oh, I've been watching your fights, mate. You're mustard. You are. You're mustard." If you kept saying it, I'd be like, "Oh, stop, man," because it just makes me cringe. And yeah, but the ones where people go, "Oh, good luck on your next fight, mate," or, you know,
they're respectful.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love hearing people talk highly about me when I'm not there. Do you know what I mean? I love to, you know, if I see like a podcast, let's say, and they're talking about me and how talented I am. And, you know, I saw Liam Harrison and say about how good I was on a podcast with Paul Smith, the comedian. That was a nice feeling. You know, that was a really good feeling. But when I'm there, I just...
What about the other side? Is any drunk or any kind of idiot try to approach you to antagonize you because they know you are a UFC fighter?
No, never. And part of me would think, "Yeah, go and try it." You know, part of me, I think when I'm out before, like, I thought, go on. Someone, like, I think there was some guy in a pub once, he was just being an arsehole to people. I remember thinking, go on, try it with me. But, you know, I'm glad he didn't, because otherwise I'd get in trouble.
Yeah, you must have a bit of a superpower kind of feeling, knowing that regardless how big someone is, if they're just a big brute and lump and they're trying to stick it on you, you can handle yourself. That must be quite a good feeling to have.
Yeah, 100%. It's confidence. You know?
Have you ever had to implement it ever?
No, never, mate, never. And I think what it is, let's say I started when I was 15 or 16. Before that, I've had people try and rob me, you know, roadmen come up when I was a kid, like 14, "Give me your phone," that sort of thing. And I never gave it to them, but I remember thinking, like, shit, I wish I knew how to defend myself. But even if someone come up to rob me now, if they had a massive knife or a gun, yeah, you can have whatever you want, mate. There's my phone, there's my watch, do you know what I mean? But having the confidence of knowing that I can defend myself, I think people sense that, because since then I've never had one person try and rob me, try and start on me, you know, and I don't exactly look intimidating, do you know what I mean? I'm 5'6", I'm not a bit of a brute that, you know, if I'm on a train station and someone wants to pick on someone, I'm probably the first person you should look at. But I think that I give that sense of confidence, or that I'm not scared. And I think people just avoid that. You know, I think people, or definitely thieves and bullies, you know, I think they want to prey on the weak. And I think that I give that confidence out there that you can't just do that with me. I think that's what stops it and deters it from, because I've never had anyone try and start on me since I've been training.
Yeah. Last couple of things. So to round off this podcast, I know you've mentioned a few times about becoming world champion at UFC. Honestly, when do you believe you're going to become the UFC champion of the world?
So I believe now, you know, I'm on a 3-win streak at featherweight. I think I need another 4 wins to get me into title contention. And I think I'd have them 4 years, because now the fights are going to be getting bigger. You don't necessarily have as many. So I definitely think that within the next 2 years, I will be looking at getting a shot for the title, or in talks of being the next in line. And then I'll take it, man. So I think 32. I'm 30 now. Give me 2 years, and I like to think that I'm the first London UFC champ.
And is there a person, individual fighter right now that you think that could be them? I could be fighting them for the world championship. And if it is them, I've got their number because of X.
So I think, Alexander Volkanovski at the moment is the, like, what they'd say, pound for pound number 1. But he's getting on a bit, so I don't know if in 2 years whether he will still be the champ. But there's a good guy, Ilya Chapora, who's very talented, he's very well-rounded, and he's young. So I feel like he may be the next champ. But yeah, this is the UFC, man. You know, anything can happen, and the division's always changing. You know, there's guys that aren't ranked who look like absolute monsters. So I think in 2 years, anything can change, but I would definitely say, and if Volkanovski's not still the champ, then Ilya Chapora, I think, will be at the time.
Here's my last question. I came up with my own catchphrase mantra when I was younger, when I first started my first business, and it goes like this: be happy, never content. I've got my own interpretation of what that means, but if I were to ask the UFC fighter, Nathaniel Wood, what does be happy, never content mean to you?
So I would say that for me is be happy with what you've got, but always strive for more, which is how you should live, because I guess if you had nothing else to look forward to or to strive for, then what is the point?
Good conclusion. Thank you very much for your time, mate. I really, really appreciate the conversation and the episode. And to the audience, please follow this man, because he's going to be future world champion. We'll look forward to seeing it.
Thanks for having me, and sorry for the coughing, man. I don't know what's come over with me today. So.
No problem. Be happy, never content, and thank you very much once again. Guys, before we end this episode, I have to give one more mention to this week's sponsors, iSecure Vehicles. Now, I've already mentioned their products. They are the very best in what they do. They have a wide range of different services and different systems to protect your asset and your vehicle. Head over to their website to find out a bit more. Thanks for watching this week's episode. There's going to be some more exciting guests, some big names, and some really, really juicy episodes.